Hi guys, and welcome to another video. In today's video we're going to be checking out this. So this is Ferrania P30, a black and white film from Italy. So let's start with a little bit of history. What is Ferrania? Now this was actually surprisingly easy. Ferrania actually have a really good little PDF and it has loads and loads of information in it about the history of Ferrania, kind of where they've come from and how they're still surviving now. But for the too long didn't readers among us, here's a little snippet. So the story of Ferrania begins in 1882 in Italy when a factory was built that specialised in creating nitrocellulose-based explosive powders. So after the Red October Soviet Revolution, Ferrania were basically just left with a warehouse full of these cellulose powders and nothing to do with them and no customers to buy them anymore. So what they did is they turned themselves towards creating photographic materials. And to begin with, this was sort of your plate photography. This wasn't the sort of 35mm film that we used to see today. Then in 1924, some guy called Ernest Lights comes along and he basically releases the first lights cameras and moves photography from sort of this kind of side niche into everyday homes. And Ferrania basically rode this wave. They were there creating film arguably before it was cool and was there whilst it was cool. Now, Ferrania has a really big history in films, especially Italian films. Loads of directors were using Ferrania films for their movies. And there's a fair few Oscar-winning films that Ferrania has their name against as the stock of choice. And then eventually Ferrania was bought out by 3M, and through various sort of restructuring and rebranding, Ferrania just slowly disappeared. And the best known film stock throughout that time was something called P30, and that's what we're sat here with today and the subject of today's video. Now, this Ferrania P30 isn't rebranded old stock, it's genuinely a new film that's being produced now and it's still being made in Italy on the original grounds of Ferrania. So what is this film? So I think first of all, let's just take a second to appreciate the branding. I think the branding looks really cool and it has this really sort of cool vibe to it. Especially for a black and white film, they've kind of got this really cool looking box. Although it's called Ferrania, do you think that font looks very Ferrari-esque? I think it does a little bit. And from what I can tell, the only connection the two companies have is that they're both Italian. Now, unlike the name might suggest, this is actually quite a slow film. So the film is actually only 80 ISO, but because it's slow, there is little to no visible grey, and the website says that it should pack some punch when it comes to contrast. Now, something to note in terms of the design is that this film is definitely a repurposed film canister. So there is no DX coding. Let's actually have a look. Should we have a bit of a naughty look under here? This was actually a Rolleith Verichrome. Oh, I wish I had a roll of that instead. So definitely one to watch out. These aren't DX coded. So if you're using a fully auto camera that has a DX code reader, you might need to watch out. So in today's video, we head a couple miles up the road from me and we went for a bit of a walk. It's a sort of woodland area with a couple of abandoned buildings. So we took the roller Ferrania and we went out with my Leica M6 and my two Voigtlander lenses. So off the bat, shooting at 80 ISO definitely has its limitations, and especially shooting in sort of a woodland environment, I found myself having to rely on sort of 30th and 60th of a second and f-stops of sort of f4 or wider. That might not be a problem, but if you're looking for sort of depth of field and in slightly dark places, just bear in mind that this film might not be for you, or you're gonna have to bring a tripod along with you. I, however, often love shooting at these apertures as it kind of lets you play on the character of these lenses, especially these two Voigtlanders. The Nocturne really does have that sort of cool, sort of vintage vibe about it when you're shooting it wide open. So looking at the images, wow, the contrast, yeah, it's definitely there. So they say on their website that this is a very contrasty film. And yeah, I believe them looking at the images. And you can even see on the negatives just how contrasty these guys are. Now, having shot this film, I'd probably avoid some of the sort of busy scenarios where I took some photos, as I think they're actually really hard to see what's going on. Where you've got the really dark blacks and really bright highlights, some of the scenes I think just look too busy. Now, something else they mentioned on the website is little to no grain due to the really high silver content. And again, I'm seeing that there's little to no grain in these images, and that's something I really love. I really like contrast and low grain. I know, shoot me, that I shouldn't be saying that. Film photography, it's all about the grain, isn't it? But I really like that sort of clean, contrasty black and white look. So the film was developed using HC110, which is my developer of choice these days. Their website has a really good little sheet that tells you various different developers and how long to do them for. In this case, it was 5 minutes, 30 seconds of continuous inversions at the start, followed by 1 inversion a minute. And the results came out really good. I definitely wouldn't sway from that. I would stick to what they say on the website. They seem to know what they're doing there. Now the film, like you could see a minute ago, is really flat. It's dried so flat, which makes scanning a pleasure, something that I really appreciate about a film. Now, one really minor complaint when it comes to scanning is the sort of wording along the film edges is so hard to see. They've used a really tiny font and it's really hard to see what's going on. And I often use these numbers just as a guide to see what I'm scanning and making sure that I've got the film the right way. You might actually find it really hard in the video to see the writing. It is a really minor complaint, and I know I'm being a little picky there. Definitely workaroundable. It's just something that was a little bit of a pain. Now, like I said, there was a few abandoned buildings out on the walk, and shooting an 80 ISO film really isn't ideal in these conditions. It was quite dark inside the buildings, and it meant I had to rely on shooting at sort of f2 and wider, and hand holding as still as I could at speeds of 30th of a second. Having said that, I actually quite like how some of the images came out. I tried to use that sort of low ISO, high contrast to try and use some of the holes in the buildings as sort of frames, as I knew the dark areas would almost be completely black. So what do I think? Would I shoot this film again? Yes, absolutely. This film is my cup of tea. It's got high contrast and low grain. It's not the sort of film that would become, I guess, an everyday film. There's kind of very specific scenarios where you want to use this film due to that really high contrast and low ISO. It's not going to replace my sort of Ilford films, but for shots where I want that high contrast, then it's definitely going to be coming with me. As ever, if you've enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. We're on our way to 1,000 subscribers now. I'm hoping we'll get there by the end of February. If you've liked the images, then you can also follow me along on Instagram. And as ever, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!